Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I'm Christy. I'm your host, and I'm so glad you're back with us again this week. I have got Kelly Hall on the show with me this week, and you guys, I say this a lot, but I'm going to say it again. You're in for a treat. Kelly is an incredible human, and she has a story that is going to be one I think that is going to be not only enlightening and encouraging, but it's going to be empowering to us. Kelly is the mom of 4 kids, 3 of whom are profoundly deaf. And what it was like to raise these 4 kiddos, 3 of whom were unable to hear the world around them. And the challenges that she and her husband faced as parents were so unique to anything else she knew. So it was such an incredible honor to share the space with her today and hear that. And as I was processing what that would have been like, I thought about how often we as believers walk through times where we are advocates for the vulnerable or the unseen or the people that are in our circles that God has put for us to advocate for and protect. And I think it is such a testimony and an example to us of how to be a good advocate for the people that God has put in our lives to advocate on their behalf. And that could be an elderly parent for you, or it may be a people or a group that God has given you a passion for, the underserved, the homeless, or those who don't have enough food. You know, the Lord calls us to take care of widows and orphans. And so wherever God has uniquely positioned you, you are more than likely an advocate for someone in your life and in your sphere of influence. And so I'm praying today that conversation that I'm going to get you to is just a beautiful reminder of what it's like to be an advocate for the people that God puts in our lives. The other thing I want to say is that I think you can find yourself in what I like to call a holy moment. And if you've been in that place before, there are times where the Lord just enters into a space with you, between you and someone else, or maybe it's been in a corporate worship situation, but the presence of the Lord is just really, really heavy in that place. And I've said before on here, and a lot of times whenever I'm talking to my guests before we record, one of my prayers is that the Lord would transcend technology because He is so much greater. I mean, He made technology. And in this conversation, it was between Kelly and I, there were some holy moments that I'm praying come through between Kelly and I. And I'm kind of a control freak. You guys have heard me talk about that probably before on the podcast. And so I'm going to leave the YouTube video largely unedited I was going to say that I was just going to leave it entirely unedited and raw. And I just don't, you know me, like, I don't think I can do that. So I'm going to leave it largely unedited on YouTube. So if you want to check that out, and I say that because sometimes when you can see people, it's easier to understand what was going on in a moment. So if you get that sense and you want to check that out, I would just encourage you to pop over to YouTube, and you can check that out. And you can see Kelly and I in the conversation that we had there. 2 things before I get you to the show. The first is, if you have not gotten that newsletter, go over to evenifpodcast.com and scroll halfway down, where you can sign up for a Spotify playlist. It's going to sign you up for my newsletter, but it's also going to get you some really good music. But the last thing before I drop you into the show is this. A large portion of the people who come on the show and our guests come to me and they say, hey, I think I have a story that might be worth sharing. There's something that God has done in my life, or there's a place that God really, showed me and taught me about Him. So if that is you and you have a story that you think might be a good fit for the podcast, reach out. I want to hear it. That's how a lot of times these episodes end up on the air, is because somebody else stood up and said, hey, I think that I have something that could encourage other people. And that's what I want this to be about. I want this show to be something that blesses you and your stories and where God taught you and grew you up or took you through the hardest of circumstances. I'll just tell you that those are the places that his goodness and his faithfulness gets to be made known. And so if that's you and you have something that you would like to share, hit me up, DM me, or email me. You can find those in the show notes or on social media. Okay? All right. I'm really glad that you get to meet my sweet friend, Kelly Hall. So without further ado, here you go. Hi, Kelly. I'm very glad to have you here with us today, my friend.
I am so glad to be here, Christy.
Thanks. I got to go on Kelly's podcast a couple of months ago, and we've been trying to connect so that she could come over here, come to our house and play. And so I'm really glad that you got to come over and share some space with me today. You know, the reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast is because I found out during our conversation that you had just a really extraordinary journey in raising your kiddos. But before we kind of get to that, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure, yeah. I've been married 30, I never can remember exactly, but about 37, 38 years. And we have four kids, and there's three girls, one boy. They're all adults, but they've had quite a journey. And three of the girls are profoundly deaf. They have cochlear implants, they speak. Our son doesn't have these special needs, but he grew up in this mix of really busy, high maintenance girls. It made him kind of not want to date for a long time. And then I am a speaker, author, podcaster. And one of the things I wanted to mention is my husband was Air Force. So he was an Air
Oh,
Force fighter pilot. He's still a pilot, but in another world. And so we moved every 2 to 3 years. So raising
yeah.
special needs kids in that constantly challenging, transitioning world of Air Force life, you never know where you're going to end up. And that was quite challenging. And it really did test my faith quite a bit.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Wow. Okay, I'm real interested to ask this. Is your son the oldest, or where is he in the birth order?
He's the middle
He's the
between
middle.
my oldest and my twins. I don't know if I mentioned that my youngest
Ru-
are twins.
Well, I knew that, but I wanted to make sure that our listeners understood. Okay, so you had a daughter. Your firstborn was your daughter, and she was profoundly deaf. Then you had a son, and then you had twins, and they are also profoundly deaf.
Mhm.
Okay, how old was your oldest child when you recognized, hey, I think maybe she could be deaf?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's kind of embarrassing for me because it really
No, there's no
wasn't.
shame. Hang on, there's no shame here. Okay.
Okay,
I
same.
we are all new parents. We are not allowing any spirit of shame in this. Okay.
Okay.
Deal?
Yep. And I know it was God's perfect timing, but my husband had gone to Korea for a year remote tour, and I had the Air Force Base said I could stay on the base. They'll let you stay. They wouldn't let me go with them. And so I just decided I would move in with my parents who were in Northern California at the time and bring our 6-month baby girl with us. So suddenly I was separated from young moms my age, and it was really hard to be around, to find that group. And so I wasn't around moms that had kids her age. I'm a physical therapist, and I know the developmental stages kids go through. I know all about babbling and what it's supposed to sound like. And she was a noisy child, and we just noticed she wasn't talking at the normal age that you would expect a child to talk, but she was very smart, very communicative. And when she wouldn't respond to me, here was my assessment of what was happening with her. I just decided she was the most stubborn child God had ever placed on planet Earth. And that was the reason. But we finally took her to a doctor when she was about 15 months old, and she rang the bell and she didn't turn her head. And I said, see, she's so busy with her play, she doesn't turn. I just can't even believe, it's so funny how we can write stories in our head to explain things. And
Yes.
it wasn't until, honestly, I was around another child her age and I heard him talking, babbling, making sounds that sounded much more like I knew her sound should be. And that's when I said, hey, something's really, really wrong. She either has a lot of fluid in her ears or she doesn't
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah.
And I found out quite quickly that she was profoundly deaf. And it was a big shock, Christy, because no one in our family had any issues like that,
Yeah.
and they determined eventually it was a recessive gene thing. Both my husband and I had it, but we didn't have a reason to suspect it earlier.
Yeah. Well, and you're a new mom. You're
Yeah,
navigating the world in the only way you've ever experienced it. I mean, I remember, I mean, we like to joke and say that, this actually is my first rodeo too, because like I've never had a 20-year-old before. I've never had a 17-year-old before, whatever. We're all just in this all together. As a new mom, you're just doing the best you can. So then you have your son, and then, I mean, this was where it blew my mind. I was like, then you had twins and they were deaf too. So I assume it probably didn't take quite as long to figure out that they were deaf,
right.
right?
2 weeks
Okay.
old, they did a test back then. Now they will test in the hospital, but
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't. My kids are 20 and 17. I don't know these things anymore.
yeah, yeah.
Um, d- okay, so whenever you found out that your number 3 and number 4 were deaf, how did you respond to that?
Well, it was pretty, it was like a punch in the gut. And it was like someone had, I mean, I get teary just describing it again. It was like someone had just pulled a scab off an old wound, because it felt very much like finding out about my first daughter. And oh boy, I had wrestled with the Lord so much before they were born. And I would tell people, okay, I'm going to have 4 kids age 5 and under, and I think I can make it if the twins are hearing. And so that was sort of what I would hang my hat on. And someone, one time, my husband, I call him the great theologian Lee Hall, he said, surely God wouldn't give us 3 deaf kids. And of course, that's not biblical, but when you're looking for a story that you can accept, sounded pretty good. But before they were born, it was so gracious the way the Lord prepared my heart. So someone at Bible study I was teaching asked me about the twins, and I quoted my great theologian husband's quote, well, surely God wouldn't give us 3 deaf kids. And she said, well, he might. And of course I knew it was true. And I was so thankful that I'd heard it. And I went home and I really just wrestled with the Lord for quite a long time. I mean, I was marching through my house. I had my Bible in my hand. I marched him through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. I'm telling him how faithful he is. I'm telling him why he would not want these twins to be born deaf. Like, it wouldn't even make sense. I know. And one of the things I said, which was fairly humorous, is, God, I know you use difficulties to grow us in our faith, and I'm good with that, but I would like a new trial. So I just listed a few the Lord could consider. Like, because I'm a physical therapist, I kind of listed some things like, I could be in a car accident. I could have a leg amputated. I just went through
You're
all these.
telling God all of the other ways you're like, let me
Yes,
suffer this way.
yes. Isn't it so much easier for us to suffer as moms than to
Yes,
have our kids suffer?
I would
So the
rather.
funny thing is that I wrestled it all out, and it was so good to just pour it all out to the Lord. The next day, God gave me a verse, and it's John 14:27, which says, my peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. And it's not the peace that the world gives. So I was looking for peace that says, your children will not be deaf. And God is saying, no matter what happens, Kelly, I will be your peace. And Christy, I can't tell you how the love in that verse surrounded my heart. I honestly felt this cushion of comfort that really cannot be explained. And when I
Yeah.
would get scared, I would go back to that moment and say, no matter what, God
Yes.
is going to get our family through this. So the day we did find out, I was stunned and I was shocked and I felt pretty beat up and wounded. But the way I process pain is I have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that is you don't want to talk about it. Like I didn't want to call my parents yet because it was going to hurt them. So I called my Bible study girls, the ones that I've been teaching in Bible study, and I told them the first person I called, and this just shows how gracious God is and how miraculous his peace is. The first person I called, I said, I just want to tell you, I found out the girls are deaf, and my friend was a new believer, and her response was, well, Kelly, they can't be deaf because the Bible says if you pray and believe, God will give you what you ask for. And I've been praying and I've been believing. So they just can't be. And I heard these words. So she's having a faith crisis right in the middle of my
Oh
crisis.
God. You're like, hold on.
Yeah, can you do this on your own time?
I
But
was like, I don't know if I can handle your faith crisis and mine.
yes, exactly. But the sweetest thing that God did
So
was
sweet.
I heard these words coming out of my mouth that had not been in my brain before. And I said, Beth, God's got us. You don't have to worry about a thing. God is going to work in and through our story, and he is going to bring glory to his name. And we are going to be very blessed. We're going to see his goodness and his love up close and personal. He's got us. And after I said that, I sat there rather stunned and felt so comforted by the
Yeah.
message God was actually speaking to my heart.
It is profound to me that we can be so wrecked
Yeah.
and still feel his peace all in the same breath. The complexity of emotions that we can hold. Uh, I can feel that when I'm hearing you. I can feel that moment. I don't share this publicly a lot. I had a moment that I will eventually share um, publicly, but where the Lord met me. I didn't want to have a daughter. I wanted to have a son. And uh, I I was scared to death of being the mom of a daughter. I didn't think I knew how. I didn't think I knew how to I didn't think I would have what it would take to parent a daughter. I was coming from my own woundedness and my own struggles with my mom. We had a very difficult relationship. And so as I'm hearing you say, I was so brokenhearted. Was it that you were brokenhearted for yourself or were you brokenhearted for them?
I was so heartbroken for them.
Yeah. And I'm gonna, I think we think that what our kids, I see it. I'm sorry. How old are they? Wait, tell me how old they are now.
Yeah,
Take your time.
I'm
You're fine.
sorry.
You're fine. You're fine.
I guess in all honesty, I didn't know how I would get through it either. So I was
That's
scared,
fair.
but I was
Sure.
really hurt for them. Um, and today, my oldest is 36 and my son is 33 and the twins are 31. So I had, kids really close together.
36 to 31. And I'm going to say this for anyone who is as a parent walking through a challenge right now, our heart for what our kids have to walk through, the things that are the challenges our kids face. I don't think we're ever immune to that grief of watching our kids struggle. And you were a physical therapist, you were an educated person, you knew the challenges they were going to face. I think the hard thing was that from an early age, the dreams and the hopes we have as parents, we all have these little dreams that our kids are going to grow up and do this, or they're going to grow up and be this way. And immediately, three of your four kids, all three of them, those dreams were gone. I mean, it was changed in the blink of an eye. Now, that didn't mean that they weren't going to grow up and have beautiful, full lives. but you
Mhm.
knew immediately these kids are going to have some challenges ahead of them.
I'm just so glad you said that because when we found out about our first daughter being deaf, it felt like she had died. I know she
Yeah.
was right there, she was alive, but all of what we had imagined for her died. The dreams lay shattered at my feet, and I didn't know what we could hope for or believe for her or what it was going to be like. And as it was hard to imagine differently. And so, I really did, on the day I found out about the twins, I really did hurt for us too. I hurt for me and I hurt for my husband. I hurt for
Yeah.
those twins that died again. And that's why it felt just so familiar and so painful all at the same time. It was really overwhelming. I couldn't imagine how our life was going to unfold or how we were going to do this as a family.
Well, and if you take the complexity of you already have a deaf little girl who you're already dealing with that. I mean, and that you're trying to learn how to communicate, you're learning sign language, you're trying to probably teach your son sign language. You yourself are learning sign language, your husband. He's moving y'all all over the world every couple of years. So every 24 months, you're having to start over with friend groups and church groups and schools eventually. And I'm watching the layer upon layer upon layer stack up. And so I can imagine being in the hospital with twin girls, not to imagine. Oh, and wait a minute. Hold on. There's more. You just had twins. Oh my gosh. So you
Right.
have two kids and now you have twins. And not only do you have twins, you have deaf twins. Like, girl, there that is enough to put some people in a padded room. And I am not making fun of people who have been in padded rooms. Trust me, I've lived enough life to understand how people get there. So not that's enough to push someone over the edge or at least need a healthy dose of Lexapro. I mean, like,
Mhm.
let's just be real.
Yeah, it was a
How
lot.
how do you even remember the first few months of that, or is it a blur? I'm just
It was a
curious.
blur. I mean, in
Okay,
some ways, I feel like the first 2 years was a blur right after
I'm
they were
sure.
born, but we had a routine that we would follow, and we had a school for the deaf that was very good in that particular location we were in. And so, they started school really, really early when you have special needs. My oldest daughter was in school. And her speech was very difficult to understand. So it took a lot of patience with every communication. She had hearing aids. We put hearing aids on our babies at 6 weeks of age. And the lab even called and said, "Is this a joke? Are these for dolls?" No, they're not. And so it was really insane. And I can remember one moment where I said to God, "I can't do this." Like, all the kids were in one room, and there was my oldest daughter, and she was so difficult to communicate with and so busy and energetic and all over the place, and ADHD to the max. And then my son, we were trying to potty train him, and then my twins were in high chairs and they had these huge hearing aids on their head. And it was one of those moments where I absolutely panicked. And I said to God, "I just can't do this. I can't." And I looked for every avenue of escape. And I actually thought about this wonderful little mental health clinic where you could go stay for a few weeks. And I thought that'd be nice. I might like that. But I just said to God, "I can't do this." And I panic and fear. I saw their whole lives. Like, how am I going to teach them about the Lord? How am I going to teach them about the Bible? They have these huge language delays. They can barely understand milk, water.
Yeah.
How are they going to understand the Holy Spirit can live inside you? Jesus loves you. How does
Let
that
me
make
try to
sense?
explain this really tough concept, and you can't hear what I'm saying. Yes.
Right, right. And it was so, but the Lord just said to me, and he kind of repeated the same promise. "Kelly, do you remember the day your oldest daughter was diagnosed? The same promise I gave you then is for today. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. This promise is for your whole family. I will give you grace to help the moment you need it." All of these promises are just flowing from the Spirit into my heart. You are going to be very blessed. You're going to see my goodness up close and personal. I've got you. You can trust me. And so it was just this beautiful moment of saying, okay, I have no idea how we're going to get through this, but I know I can trust you and you're going to get us through. So I just had to let go. I mean, that's what my whole journey has been like. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your understanding. It was just like one big crazy picture of that.
Yeah. Well, and we're recording this in January. That was the verse I posted on Monday on my social media. Like that was the verse this week was trust in the Lord with all your heart. I was like, oh, when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, like absolutely. What I'm visualizing, because what I tend to do whenever people are telling me stories, and I don't know if this is normal or not, y'all don't judge me, okay? But I hear people's stories and I envision you standing in your kitchen and probably like I would have been going, throwing my hands up in the air and going, I can't do this. I can't do this. And that's when he leans down and he whispers to you, that's okay. That's okay. I got you. What a gracious, gracious God we serve. What is in the world just happened there? Did you see that?
I did. A little thumbs up cloud popped up beside your
Did you?
head.
I wasn't touching my computer or anything. Was that God? Did
That
God just say like that we're on the right track?
good job. Yes, that was so. But what's
What
happening?
in the world is this? Good job. We're going to try it again. Good job. Nope, that was God. That was God. Did you? I'm not even kidding you. I was not touching my computer. You weren't?
No,
I
I'm
don't
far
know how.
away.
No? See, look, I just did that.
Okay. That's so
Okay.
strange. Oh, the Lord is so good and gracious. And I just,
Wow.
when he just puts this banner of affirmation over our lives, like I'm
He
with
just
you.
put a banner of affirmation over our whole conversation right here.
That's right.
Okay, that caught me off guard. That's never happened. But we're gonna keep going because obviously God said we're good. Um, you had to have gotten to this place whenever you said, I can't. I'm going to I'm going to the Betty. Did y'all call it the Betty? That's what we called it. The Betty Ford
No.
Clinic. Whenever you drop there was
Oh,
a what book was it that said that, oh, well, she dropped her basket. That's what they said whenever a woman lost her mind. It's like the Yaya Sisterhood book. It's not a godly book. Don't y'all don't go read it because I said anything. But there's this one book and she talks about her mom. When her mom lost her mind, they all said that she dropped her basket and she went to the Betty. And so she spent some time at the Betty. Well, anyways, I can only imagine. I think in fact, as you were telling me the story about you're getting to the point of saying, I can't, I was going to ask you, when did you know you were going to be okay? Where was that point? And then you said, and God told me we're going to be fine. I was like, oh, okay. It was just immediate. Okay. Sometimes we get God's answers like, immediately. Sometimes we have to wait on them. I love though that he is such a compassionate God that he knew you needed that
mm,
rock, that goodness.
mhm.
He knew you needed to hear, we're going to be okay. I've got you. You may not have you,
Yeah.
and that's okay. I feel like our
Mhm.
lives, we think when we're in control, we think whenever we've got it all figured out or we've got all of the, if the laundry is ever all done and all put away, it's because I have died. Somebody has come in and they are cleaning up before the funeral and everybody comes over. That's the only way the laundry is all going to get done at my house. Okay. Just telling y'all. But we think that if we can just if our lives are going like this and they're going straight and they're what we've expected and that somehow we're better off that way. And that wasn't what God asked you to walk. That wasn't what he asked you to walk through. Um, talk to me about tell me about your girls and your son too. I've stopped kind of a stop right here. I want to hear about your kids, but about your girls more, but I want to ask you about your son. What was that like for him, and how was that like parenting the lone ranger who could hear you when you called and asked him to take out the trash?
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things I was very mindful of with this middle son, with David, is that I wanted to make sure he did not fall between the cracks and feel invisible,
Yes,
because we were always going to therapies. We were always getting hearing aids. We were getting, and then eventually surgeries for cochlear implants. We were moving sometimes away from my husband so that we could get services for the girls, and he was being separated from his dad, and so I tried to create such a family cohesive atmosphere where he feels a part of the family. I mean, he's a pretty independent kid, and I could have easily let him play on his own, but I always sat with him and spent time alone with him, very intentionally spent time alone with him to affirm him, to, have a pulse on how he was doing. But we did discover that this affected him growing up in the
I'm
middle of
sure.
all of this. As he got older, he didn't tell us this, but he was talking to a dear friend of ours, the mom who's my age. And, she just asked him, what was this like growing up with these girls? And he said, I had a lot of fear and anxiety, and that produced itself as anger in my life because I felt like I was going to be the one responsible for taking care of all of them when they were older.
Yeah.
And that really shocked me. And so when I found out, we would tell him, we're setting things, they're good, they're going to be independent. You're never going to be responsible for caring for them. But he was just a conscientious kid, and he did take care of a lot of things. Like, even though he was 3 years younger than our oldest daughter, she had ADHD. And so when they got to the point where we could leave them home alone, he was actually in charge. And so
The middle child was in charge of the older and the younger.
yeah, it was so playful and fun, and
Yeah.
and so it did put that responsibility on him, even though we tried not to. But he's good now; he's healed from that, and the Lord has
Yeah.
just taken care of that anxiety and stress.
You have told me privately that there was a point where you came to the end of yourself, not just the day that you thought about running away, but that you actually came to the end of yourself. Yeah. I would love for you to share that with our audience.
Absolutely. I describe this as, well, first of all, I'll set it up. It was a year and a half, almost a full year and a half without my husband. I had moved to St. Louis with 4 little kids. The twins had no language yet. They were only a year and a half. We were moving there so that our oldest daughter could receive, so all 3 of the girls really could receive cochlear implants and go to a school where they would learn to listen and speak. The 3 best schools at that time for learning to speak and learning to use cochlear implants successfully were all 3 in St. Louis. So we
Oh,
had to move to St. Louis. It's so crazy. My husband could not move there. He said, there are no jobs for me there. I am a fighter pilot in the Air Force. And
yeah.
to me, that was irrelevant. Like, I have to move there. They have to learn these things. So I don't
Yeah.
know what we're going to do, but he ended up, his next assignment was a 1 year long school, and he was able to get transferred out of a really good school in a great location to a not so great location, but he was only 5 hours away. So he would come home the first year just on the weekend for like a day and a half. We'd grocery shop, we'd do stuff. He'd go back. Then after that, he was transferred to another base much further away. And I spent the next 3 months, not seeing him as often. That's the setup. Okay.
Okay.
I had 4 young kids. The week we moved in, my oldest daughter had surgery in a hospital where I knew no one, in a city where I knew no one, to receive the cochlear implant. And she came home, and they don't turn it on at that point for 6 weeks. They wait for the wound to heal because you have to wear the external device, and it sits on the wound, the coil does. And so we did the surgery right when we moved in. We were in this house in the middle of summer. There was no air conditioning upstairs. It was very hot in St. Louis. The real estate agent was trying to get that issue fixed. We didn't have a dishwasher, and my twins were 1.5. And none of my kids can understand each other at this point. So my son couldn't understand my oldest daughter. Nobody could understand the twins, but they were very good at lip reading because I started teaching them as they were infants when I was feeding them to pay attention to my face. But every day was crazy. You're taking care of four littles. You're trying to do school. You're trying to meet their special needs. And you're lonely. I had moved there not knowing anyone. I didn't have a military community. I didn't have any family. I didn't have friends. I just didn't have any support system. We didn't have a church yet, even though I would visit churches. We just didn't have anything familiar. So it was really hard, as you can imagine. And
Yeah.
so there was just this one part where I was really getting weary and worn out. And this is how I would describe what this felt like in my relationship with God. It felt like God was holding a dropper full of grace above my head and feeding me one drop of grace at a time. So I always felt like I'm barely making it.
Like a baby bird just feeding you droplets of grace.
Yes, I am barely hanging on here. And so I didn't even know how I was going to get through. And I was starting to get depressed. And I was starting to think, I feel like I could use some counseling, but how are you going to fit that into your schedule, And so
Yeah. Hey, kids, watch yourselves for a few minutes while I go talk about how crazy this all is. And we didn't have Zoom back then. We didn't have
right.
internet back then. So, yeah.
And so what was going to happen is that the twins also were going to have surgeries to receive cochlear implants because the FDA lowered the age of requirement down to 2. So the twins were going to be in the first group of 100 kids who received cochlear implants at the age of 2.
Wow.
And that was going to happen. And all of this was going on, a lot of decisions. We're doing therapy every day. We have schools, we have homework, all this stuff is going on. And my twins are really hyper. And I would give them, when I would bathe them, they had this, they were escape artists. They would escape out of the house and run down the alley butt naked. I'm not kidding. Like, no matter, it happened several times. And so that just gives you a glimpse. That's just a glimpse of how insane my life was. Okay.
There's absolutely no judgment here. Zero. This is judgment-free zone, as it turns out. I'm just laughing. I'm just like, I think that's hilarious. True story. Did you know I slept walk one time, walked out the front door, stripped off all my clothes, and walked out the front door naked when I was like 5 or 6? Yep. So I don't judge. I've done it apparently.
Apparently. Well, they just loved that freedom. Okay. Thankfully, they were always safe. They don't have I can't yell for them. They can't hear me. They could run in front of a car and be, it's really scary. But anyway, no one turned me into anything. And I was.
No, because they all knew you were doing the very, very best that you could.
Yes.
So you're getting to this point where you're like, okay, I need help myself. Like I gotta, yeah. Okay.
Here's how creative God is. I grabbed a book from a Christian bookstore back when you had bookstores that you could, browse through physically. And the book was called When Dreams Die. You've already mentioned how that's a part of the story. And I thought it sounds pretty good. So I had a moment of peace and I was laying on my couch. I opened the book, and right at the beginning of this book, she just has pages where she lists the losses that she had experienced. So I'm reading those, and I'm just reading it. Like, this is a normal day. I'm just reading through her list thinking, oh, okay, this looks like a good book. And suddenly the impact of the losses we had walked through, that I had walked through, hit me like a ton of bricks. And it wasn't even conscious. I just started sobbing from a place so deep inside of me. I didn't even know it existed. And it was so odd because my brain, my mind was not participating in this. I almost didn't understand why I was sobbing. It was just happening to me and in me. And it went on for a long time, and I didn't understand it, but I remember feeling like God had me in his embrace, and that this was him. He was working. And it went, like I said, it went on. And then finally, at one point, Christy, it was just finished. I knew it was finished, and I stood up and I washed my face, and I felt better. And I
You were
said,
at the bookstore or you were at home?
oh dear, that was a big part of the story that I didn't clarify. I was at home on my couch.
Okay, I for a minute thought you were at the bookstore and I was like, okay.
Okay,
All
well, that would
right.
have been very uncomfortable.
Okay, so you're at home. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
wouldn't have
Carry on.
surrendered to all that. Yeah, so I felt safe in God's embrace there on my
Yeah.
couch in the privacy of my house with no one else around. And I just cried. But my whole
No
thing
judgment to
was,
people who cry in the bookstores, by the way.
yes,
Me. Carry on.
carry on. So I just said to God, okay, I do feel better. Obviously, you were doing something inside of
Yeah.
me. I don't know what it was. I would really like to understand it. And so that was my question to the Lord all day long was, please help me understand what you did. What was this about? And finally, at the end of the day, God just said, you just needed to grieve the fun, happy life that you had envisioned for yourself as a young mom. There was
Yes.
really nothing fun about this. It was really, really, really hard.
It was really
And it
hard.
was so gracious of the Lord to be my counselor when I needed one the most. And he
Mm.
fit it into my schedule. I didn't have to schedule it any outside of my house with somebody else.
I am so impressed. I think anyone else who's listening to this is probably hearing what I'm hearing too is that this is a mom, you are a mom that cared so deeply for your girls and said, we're going to get you what you need. We are going to move across the country. I'm going to sacrifice what I have to sacrifice, my well being, my family, my what is going on. We're not okay. I'm going to keep going. God's just apparently saying we're on the right track. Um, God, he's saying you are laying down your life, Kelly, for the betterment of your children. I don't know that there is a more beautiful representation of Christ in the flesh than what you were doing. And did it cost you? Yes. It pushed you to the very end of yourself. Gratefully, though, he's still, whenever we get to the end of ourself, that's the beginning of him. Thank
Mhm.
goodness.
I'm so grateful for that time. I
Yeah.
had prayed that God would help me to trust him with all my heart and not lean on my own understanding.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful when he does that. And I mean, there were times when I really struggled with feeling sorry for myself. And what
Oh,
I
yeah.
did was have a list of verses. I mean, on it, people would say, I have a favorite verse, and I would actually roll my eyes and say, oh, just one, I need about 30 right now to believe God really is who he says he is.
You're like, one ain't gonna do it. I don't have a life verse. I've got a life doc. Here's my
Yeah,
document.
oh, I love
You know
that.
those list of 100 verses people have come up with and they
Yeah.
share them? It's because of this. They're like, I needed all of these to remember that he was good. And what you just said, I'm going back. I do not want this to get past us. What you just said is so important. Just because we grieve and we have a moment where we go, I am at the end of myself. I know you're in control and I'm going to choose to believe you. And I needed to grieve this. That doesn't mean that magically you're never going to have feelings of pity or you're not going to have moments where you're just mad at God.
Yeah.
And you're gonna like somebody said, so I don't know where I read it. It was recently. I saw somebody say, I have to forgive, I'll forgive God, and then like 5 minutes later I've got to forgive him again, or I've got to forgive this person, and then I've got to forgive him again 30 minutes later. It's a continual laying down of our lives. It's a continual submission. But I love you talk about there's a point where your girls were diagnosed actually with Lyme disease, and you talk about some anger that you experienced. I would love it if you want to share with if you want to talk about that. I'd love for you to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was 2012. I thought our girls were going to launch. So everybody was two of our kids were graduating from college. Our twins were graduating from high school, and they also had about 40 hours of college credit at the same time. And so I thought, hey, this is our celebration year. Everybody's going to launch and we've made it. Woohoo, has a big celebration in my head. Okay, I finally arrived at the finish line kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I noticed my oldest daughter had struggled with health issues for quite a while. And I started seeing it in my twins more and more and more. I started noticing it. Let's say that.
Okay.
Turned out a lot of these symptoms had been there for quite a while. And it's even possible that one of my twins, who is the sickest currently, was born with some neurological misfiring, because we saw seizures in her when she was very little. And this wasn't a normal part of her life, and they didn't cause brain damage, but there was just some neurological issues. So what happened was I suddenly realized there was just this moment where I had just asked one of my twins, not the one I just mentioned, hey, you want to go to the store with me today? And she said, I just can't. And tears ran down her face. And I realized that she was just locked in this intense anxiety. And I didn't know where that had come from. I didn't know she was having panic attacks all the time and she had an anxiety disorder. And I also didn't know that all three of these girls had Lyme disease. We wouldn't discover that until much later, but this anxiety disorder was huge and was paralyzing her. And so all of this revelation was just happening in segments. Like I did not know what was going on. But what hit me was I realized my girls are not okay. Nobody is okay. And I didn't understand why. I didn't know what it was. And I was really upset with the Lord. And the word I would use was, I was offended. Like I didn't stop trusting him. I didn't stop going to him. For a while, I stopped talking to him about this in my heart. I just stuffed it until he just called me out and just invited me on a prayer retreat. And he helped me uncover these deep, deep places. And again, Christy, he's so gracious. My friend that was with me had a vision of me covered in ashes, like people at the World Trade Center, and God spoke to her and said, mourn. So again, God was just inviting me to grieve all of these losses.
Yes.
And as I started, and I just love how kind he is. He's not telling any of us to suck it up. He's so compassionate.
Yes.
He knows that we are just dust. He understands what it is to be wounded and to need healing. And so I started opening my heart up more, even though it was really scary because I didn't know how wounded I was inside. I was afraid I was going to fall apart. And he eventually helped me to grieve through songs, through scriptures, all of these ways. But what he uncovered, this was the big breakthrough moment for me. He helped me put words to the deepest wound in my heart. And when I finally said this out loud to him, it helped free me from some of the strongholds of my offendedness. So the words he put into my mind were these: God, when I read the story of my girls' lives, what I see is neglect, not the care of a good shepherd. I know it's not true. I know you are the good shepherd, but I can't read their story any other way. So I need you to help me see differently. Because the deepest wound was really, why wouldn't you let them be okay? Why do you keep piling more suffering on top of them?
Yes.
Putting words to our deepest wounds, to the truest, what I would call it, is really saying out loud the deepest reality in our soul. That's what I did. It frees us to trust God more. It frees us from the offenses, but I still need to heal. And so I just kept healing from the grief. And then God used scripture. It was actually the story of Lazarus when he said he knew Lazarus was sick. And he says he loved them. He loved Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, but he waited. And
Yes.
God used that to bring a lot of healing to my heart.
Yes.
His delays were not evidence of a lack of love. And his delays were not evidence of a lack of care. He is the good shepherd. He was caring for our girls. He was writing a story that was bigger and more beautiful than anything I could imagine. That was an amazing journey for me, and I'm so grateful for it. As God walked me through that, I can honestly tell you that even though I have continued to had to grieve a lot of losses and heal from a lot of sorrow, I have never again been offended at the Lord. That was a deep healing work that God did.
Hmm. It's because he's big enough to handle it. He, we can take him every ounce of our pain, the worst of it. And I think that seeing our children struggle or suffer is probably one of the hardest things for a parent to do. I think it's probably also representative of what he sees whenever he sees us struggle, because he loves us, like he loves us more than we love our children, if we can even fathom that possibility. You had the blessing and the curse of being able to see and readily identify your children's struggles. There are parents who have kids with invisible struggles that they don't realize, like the anxiety or the learning disability or the physical things that are going on inside of a kid that the parents don't realize. What you get to do though on this side of it, now that they are grown, is you get to stand on the other side of that mountain that you went over and say, but by the grace of God, we did this. I did this. We made it. We have survived. There was one point you were telling your story and I was like, well, I know she lives because we're here.
Yeah.
You know, you you've lived to tell the tale, but you've not only lived to tell the tale, you've lived to testify to his
Mhm.
goodness. And what
Yeah.
I see, over the overarching thing I see, is a mom who loved her kids so deeply and fought so hard to give them everything they needed. I, on behalf of 4 kids, thank you for
Mm.
doing what you did and for encouraging so many moms who are maybe in the middle of it right now. We have the blessing of walking beside a family friend who has a kiddo with some special needs, and I have watched them so faithfully over the years just nurture and protect that sweet little girl. And what would you say to the mom who's in the middle of it?
One of the things that helped me so much, because I would say we've just now gotten to a
Yeah.
point where we can say our family is not in crisis anymore. And our oldest daughter is 36. So it's been
Yeah.
a long journey. So hold your expectations loosely before the Lord. I had an expectation that in 2012, everything was going to be hunky dory. And there were a lot of soul wounds that my girls suffered along the way that needed to be healed. And they have gone through counseling. There was rejection, there was not feeling like they measured up, there was not feeling seen and heard and validated by peers and those others in authority, except in our family. They certainly had that in our family. But there have been a lot of wounds, and we see so much healing now. I feel like we just now hit the backside of victory. I mean, we're just starting to see this, walking it out. And so what I want to say is, as a mom, the hardest thing for me was trying to figure out what was going on. What do I do? I need a plan. As a physical therapist, you look for these areas, the trouble areas, you develop a plan out of that, and then you solve it. And so I would say, let go of the notion and the desire to get everything fixed and finished, settled and solved, and instead look to the one who holds all solutions in his hands. What gave me so much comfort is Daniel's prayer in Daniel 2, where after God revealed to Daniel the Pharaoh's secret dream and gave him the interpretation of it, Daniel praises God and he says, you reveal what is hidden. And that's what I would say to the Lord. God, I'm freaking out here. I do not know what's going on, but you know and you see. Please, I'm not going to Okay, I'm not going to follow my panicked impulses that just start rushing around trying to fix everything. That's what
Yes.
we want to do as moms. But what if I just wait with you and trust that you will reveal to me what I need to know and what path I need to take? And I just wait for you to speak. And I can tell you that God is faithful to do that. And also, He does healing in secret hidden places that you're not even a part of. He's just answering your prayers. He will
Yes.
do it.
Yes. He's weaving together this beautiful tapestry, just this enormous, larger than life tapestry that is so beautiful. I'm
Yeah.
glad that we get to be close together in that tapestry, just for the record. You have a beautiful soul and a beautiful spirit and just such a lovely, lovely heart, Kelly Hall. Oh, I'm really glad that you are here today. Not only that, but I'm really just glad that you came on the show and you came with such a vulnerability today that I needed it. And a lot of my listeners I know needed to hear it because not only are we all grieving the loss, we're all grieving something. I think if you ask people and they were really honest with you, I think they would tell you they're grieving something, either
Mhm.
a friendship or a parent that's struggling, or a woundedness from their past. We're all grieving, and it's about how we grieve. Are we grieving with our hearts turned toward Him? Or are we grieving alone, which just breaks my heart because He wants to meet us?
Amen. Amen.
Girl, thank you for coming on this show today. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Gosh, I've had so much fun. I want to tell you that one of the biggest prayers my husband and I have prayed over the years is, God, don't waste our pain. Don't
Mm,
waste all this pain that we have walked through. And every single solitary time I share my
yes.
story, both my husband and I rejoice because we see God bringing glory to Himself through the sharing of the story. And that brings healing and comfort to our hearts. So thank you for today.
Oh, yeah. And if you want to connect with Kelly, you can find her on Instagram, and we'll link all that. There are times where I come into podcast episodes to record them and I feel like I'm super prepared for episodes. And then there are times where I think that the Lord just says, I want you to just go into this one and I want you to meet and I want you to share space and listen to somebody's heart. And that was today. I don't know, on my end, I like to over prepare, and Kelly can testify to that as a podcast host. Because of some circumstances surrounding life in general, we came into today open handed and said, we're just going to let God show up. And man, did He ever. Kelly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. This was a gift.
It truly was. All right, friends, thanks so much for being here. And good Lord willing, I will see y'all again next week.